Welcome back. As always, it's so good that you're watching. Karibu Sana. In the last episode, I ended by asking, how can you love your neighbor if you do not love yourself? And in the midst of it, I remember mentioning, we love ourselves, but do we know we love ourselves when we know ourselves, all right? So, do you know what you have within you? Do you know what you have within you? Why do I say that? Because when I know what I carry within me, when I know who I am in the grand scheme of life, when I know my assignment, it becomes easier to love me. And it allows me to do what I can and what I'm sent here to do. So let me give you an example. I was thinking about Moses. Moses is this child, the third born in a family, because Aaron and Miriam are older than him. And when he was born, Pharaoh was so worried about the way the Israelites were growing. They were expanding, they were increasing. And so his leaders told him, let us wipe them out, right? He was told by his advisors, let us kill their male sons because they will become more than us and they will conquer us. And the story is there at the beginning of Exodus. You can read it. So his mother keeps him for 3 months because there's something she knew about this child. And then she takes a reed basket, covers it in tar, as in tar for the road, and then puts her baby in and pushes him onto the Nile. Now, the Nile is a crocodile-infested river. It has always been croc-infested. So he sails down the Nile. Now, I can imagine his sister running alongside just to make sure he's fine. And then he ends up in the hands of the princess and he's raised in the palace. Until one day, Ramesses, the king's son, tells him, you are not from here. Until that day, he did not know he was not a child of the princess. As far as he was concerned, he was a child from there. So I can imagine her saying, yes, this is how I got you. Truly, you're a Hebrew. And he would begin reading because they were taught the history. If you were in the palace and you had the caliber of who he was, you were taught to read, to write hieroglyphics. So he knew all those things. So imagine him suddenly discovering why he had always felt different. Because his DNA was different. His gene code was different. His lineage was different. He was tied to a God who was greater than this God. Right? But who was he? He was a Hebrew, raised in Egypt, educated in Egypt. But he eventually tried to defend his people in the way he thought he should, because I think I said at the beginning, he was built on God's perspective. So God comes and makes you with a clear picture of who you are and very clear about what you must do for his kingdom. The only thing he hopes for you to do is to actually become that. Okay? So now imagine he's come and he knows that within him there's that desire to rescue and he doesn't know where it comes from. But when he meets his people and he sees how difficult their lives are, he tries to save them by attacking an Egyptian and he kills him. The long short of the story is that he runs off into the desert. He's in the desert for many years, gets married, probably has children, and then he meets God. So let's go to Exodus 4. In Exodus 4, God comes to have a conversation with Moses. And he's coming to tell him, I sent you to redeem my people. And in my mind, I can see Moses thinking, Joker, please look at me. I ran away from the palace. I have a stutter. I'm not a leader. I'm educated, but I can't use my education. And I can hear God asking him, what is that you have in your hand? And he says, I have a staff. And he says, drop it to the ground. And the staff becomes a snake. And he begins to run. And God says, pick it up by the tail. And it becomes a staff again. And then God tells him, with that staff, you will do signs and wonders. And that caught me and that has stayed with me. Because it is with what he had within him that qualified him for God to call him. Before he knit us in our mother's womb, he knew us. And he assigned us very distinct paths. So that if I become anything less than what he saw in his mind, I will have failed at my assignment on earth. But the mercies of God are so big that he will never allow me to fully fail. So the question I want to ask today is, what is that you have within you that can be put to use for the kingdom, that can be put to use to change the world? Some of us are created to be exceedingly brilliant business people. Others are mathematicians, others are speakers, others are writers. What is it that lies within you that you can use to better the world around you? And that comes from the place of introspection and a place of self-love. I had a challenge initially when I began thinking about myself as a storyteller, because that, in my mind, that was something other people did, okay? Until I understood that I do have the gift, I do. So then I began pursuing it with diligence. And because the oral storytelling was harder for me at that point because of where I was, I explored the one that came naturally, which was written. And I remember blogging for almost 8 years before the stories began to flow seamlessly. But what I did is I took what was within me and I told myself, this is who I am. And for a long time, I didn't tell people I had a blog. I just wrote, because that's all I knew to do what that thing that I had. So my question to you today is very simple. As you look at yourself, what is that you have within you? What can you do with what you have within you? And then ask God, what do you want me to do with what you have given me? The outworking of my gifts currently and how I had always thought they would work are very different, very, very different. But now I've come to understand that what I have in me is a gift from God. And as I begin to love me and appreciate me and utilize the gifts I have as he would have me do that, my life has changed. So I leave you with a question. What do you have in you that you can use to change the world? How can you harness that? But what do you have in you? Identify it. Go sit and think and actually write it down. Then come back and we have a conversation. God bless you.